Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. So welcome to another episode of Christian Apologetics. This series I've been uploading on Sundays. And now in this series I've been sharing with you guys in a pretty easy and simple way all the topics of Christian apologetics. So arguments that support the existence of a theistic God, and then arguments that support the reliability of the gospel accounts, the New Testament documents, and therefore the truth of Christianity over any other religion. Now today I'm going to talk about the resurrection, and I'm going to talk about the objections against the resurrection. Now the resurrection of Jesus is the event that is the central event of Christianity. It's the cornerstone of Christianity. If this event could be proved to have never existed, to have never occurred, then all Christianity would crumble immediately. Even the Apostle Paul says that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, your faith would be useless. So our belief, so the Christian belief would be useless if Jesus didn't rise from the dead. So the resurrection is the most important event in history. If it could be proved that it never occurred, then Christianity would be false. Now, of course, the Gospels, the eyewitnesses accounts, are the only documents that we can find in the early century that actually document in detail this event, the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. If we take a look at other historical documents, non-Christian from that era, we can find that there was, these documents refer to the fact that there was this rumor that the body of Jesus had disappeared from the tomb, and that the disciples were saying that he was alive. So this is what we can find in all the other documents, historical documents from all that time. And therefore we have the documents from the Gospels, that say to us that Jesus did resurrect, how it happened, and all more details. And then we have non-Christian sources of documents that say instead that there was this rumor that the body of Jesus had disappeared. So that's the first thing. And then the fact that the disciples were proclaiming around that he was alive. Now, what are the most common objections against the resurrection? As we said before, if this event could be proved to have never occurred, then Christianity would be false, would be wrong, would crumble right away. The first objection is the fact that, the resurrection never actually occurred. It was all a lie. So that's the first objection. The disciples made up all the story of the resurrection. It was something that they invented. It was something that they made up. And this objection goes like this. Because the body of Jesus, as we said before, disappeared. No one ever found the body of Jesus. And therefore, someone must have taken it. So this objection says that the disciples, other people somehow, were able to overcome all the Roman guards that were guarding the body of Jesus during the night. They would steal the body of Jesus. They would hide it, bury it somewhere that no one would ever find. And they would start afterwards proclaiming the fact that Jesus was alive, that he was the Messiah, that he was the true God, and that he had rose from the dead. But it was all a lie. So all the disciples and all the people that helped them would know that it was a lie. This is the first objection. Now the answer, so the argument that refutes this objection is very easy. There are three main points in the refutation of this objection. First point is the Roman guards. The Roman army was one of the strongest in ancient history, and all the soldiers were trained very strictly and were elite, like we will call them professionals, right? They were professional soldiers trained to fight. And instead, the disciples were normal people. They didn't have access to any weapons. The Gospels and many of the documents just, they present the disciples are very easy person. Many times they were even like analphabet people. They were uncultured people. So they were very common people, the disciples. So the first problem, the first evidence that there is against this objection is the fact that it's very unlikely that a group of not trained, not professional people would somehow overcome the Roman army, that would somehow overcome these trained and elite and professional soldiers and would win them in a battle, and then they would be able to steal the body. It's very unreasonable to think that this event could occur, right? If we take normal people against a trained soldier, there is no chance. Like the soldier is always gonna win, especially in that time. There were no handguns, there were no rockets, there were no other arrows, there were no distant weapons. And so that's the first problem with this objection, the fact that the Roman guards wouldn't be overcome that easily by peasants. The second problem with this objection goes into the behavior of the disciples. Now we have to remember that when Jesus died, all the disciples were completely depressed. They closed themselves inside their houses. They weren't leaving because they were afraid that they would kill them all, because Jesus had died because he was saying that he was God, and the Jews killed Jesus because of that reason, and because the disciples were followers of Jesus, they thought that they would kill them all. They would also kill them, and so they were afraid. They were frightened. They didn't know what to do. They were completely lost. They were afraid that if they might go outside their houses, they might lose their lives. They might be killed. Now, the problem here lies in the fact that unexpectedly, without any kind of reason, after 3 days that Jesus died, and then when his body disappeared, the behavior of the disciples changed completely. They weren't anymore afraid to go out. They weren't afraid to proclaim that Jesus was the true God, that he was alive, that he had rose from the dead. They weren't afraid anymore. This sudden change of behavior cannot be really explained by a lie, right? If the disciples really stole somehow the body of Jesus and then they made up this lie, we wouldn't really explain this change of behavior, right? Because they knew that he actually wasn't alive, that Jesus hadn't resurrected. So how can you explain why then the disciples changed their behavior? They weren't afraid anymore, and they started proclaiming Jesus, just like that, if they knew it was a lie. That's the second evidence against this objection. And then the third and the strongest evidence against this objection lies in the death of all the disciples. All the disciples died because of what they said. They proclaimed Jesus to be the true God. That the fact that he had resurrected. They never changed the story. They never said that it was a lie. They never retorted or changed anything. They were always proclaiming the same thing. They never changed what they said until they even died. So they all died. They all suffered, tortured, prison, and then death. And even like that, they never changed their story, ever. They always kept on saying the same things, that Jesus was the true God, that Jesus had resurrected. They never changed what they said. And therefore, if it was all a lie, this is a very, very important psychological portion, right? Because someone can die for a lie. if they believe it's truth, if the truth. But someone dying for a lie, knowing that it's a lie, it's something that is completely unreasonable. No sane human being would do this. But all the disciples did. They never changed the story. They never changed anything in what they said. They kept on proclaiming Jesus, that he was alive, that he had resurrected, that he was the true God, until they all eventually died. Well, all other than John. They all died for their faith. And we have to remember that the disciples weren't always close to one another. So the disciples started spreading throughout the ancient world. Someone went to, stayed right there in Israel. Other ones went other parts. They were very much apart from each other. But even the distance didn't change what they said. Even if they weren't able to talk to each other, they never changed the story. If it was all a lie, then we could presume that every disciple would change slightly the story, right, depending on where they went. But this never happened. And so these three pieces of evidence was the most reasonable conclusion. Is the fact that the disciples didn't lie about the resurrection. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't something that they made up. Because of the Roman soldiers, because of the fact that their behavior changed, and because of the fact that they all died for what they said. So we can see that these three pieces of evidence together, they form this very huge refutation to this objection. So to the objection, the resurrection never occurred, it was all a lie, we can answer like this: no, because the disciples would never overcome the Roman guards, because the disciples, we cannot explain the change of behavior of the disciples, and then because they all died for what they said. So once again, these are three pieces of evidence that conclude. So the most reasonable conclusion is the fact that the disciples didn't lie about this. So they actually believed that the resurrection occurred. But then we come to the second objection. The second objection is the resurrection never occurred. Yes, the disciples were convinced that it was true, but it was just all a dream. It was just an hallucination. It was just something that they dreamed. So a dream. Imagine all the disciples, were all together, maybe crying, depressed, right there. And then the Jesus that they reported in the Gospels to have seen wasn't the real Jesus. It was just a dream. They all dreamed together, Jesus, and they really saw him as real, but it wasn't real. And therefore, we can explain in this way the fact that they never stole the body, they're changing the behavior, and then the fact that they all died for this because they believed it was true, but it was actually just a dream, an hallucination. Now, the refutation of this objection is actually pretty easy, and it's based on a social and psychological, again, evidence. We have evidence nowadays that tells us that people, maybe two people, can hallucinate the same thing at the same time, but no more than two people. So we cannot explain why more than 500 people, because those are the number of people that the Bible tells us that were able to see the risen Jesus. So we cannot explain how 500 people were all able to have the same hallucination about the same subject at the same time and in the same way. This is something that doesn't happen. An hallucination like this, a massive hallucination, that everybody sees the same, is something that is not scientifically explainable. It's something that is not grounded in what we can measure, what we can see nowadays. As I said before, one, maybe two people can hallucinate the same subject at the same time, but three already, it's very, very unlikely, and four, impossible. Imagine 500. So the hallucination hypothesis, the fact that the disciples saw the resurrection of Jesus, but actually it never occurred, is something that can be very easily refuted by just considering the fact that a global and a grouped hallucination of this kind has never occurred in history, and that it can actually it cannot even be explained by science. So this hypothesis really falls off, and yeah, so we cannot really explain how, by being different people, everyone, if they hallucinate maybe the same subject, but they would have different perspectives of the subject. So how is possible that all the disciples did and said the same thing? All the 500 did said the same thing, right? It's very, very unlikely. So once again, the most reasonable conclusion is the fact that the disciples didn't hallucinate. And now what we have left? We have left with just the evidence. Because if the disciples didn't lie and it wasn't an hallucination, then the most reasonable conclusion is the fact that the resurrection actually occurred. The only reasonable conclusion that explains all the evidence, all the change in the behavior, all the historical context of the Roman guards, the fact that all the disciples died, they never changed story, and so on, all this evidence is answered. So the most reasonable conclusion is the fact that the disciples did actually experience, they were able to see the resurrected Jesus, as they say in the Gospels. Even if it's a supernatural event, that doesn't mean that it never occurred. It's the most reasonable conclusion from all the evidence that we have. So what we should exclude this conclusion just because it has a supernatural event, right? So that's the video. that's the most common objections against resurrection. There are other minor objections, but I think these two objections are the most common ones, and you can see that they can be very easily refuted. But of course, you have to know how to refute them. And I hope that this video was helpful for you to understand better, the fact that the resurrection is an event that occurred in history that can be tested, can be measured, can be analyzed, and the most reasonable conclusion is the fact that this event actually occurred. Remember, you have to have more faith to believe that it didn't occur than it did, because you are actually believing against the most reasonable evidence, the most reasonable conclusion that there is from the evidence. So I hope you guys enjoyed. God bless you, and see ya. Bye-bye.